Hey, good morning. Today's another one of our first fives. Today we're looking at this text from Matthew chapter 7. In fact, it's one of the texts that's quoted often about the Bible from people who don't even necessarily read the Bible. But it's a passage of scripture that we should probably take pretty seriously. And so here's what the passage says. It's in the middle of the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus teaching, and here's what he says. Do not judge, or you too will be judged. For in the same way you judge others, you will be judged. And with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye, when all the time there's a plank in your own eye? You hypocrite, first take the plank out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. Do not give dogs what is sacred. Do not throw your pearls to pigs. If you do, they may trample them under their feet, and then turn and tear you to pieces. I'm going to stop there and we'll read it just a little bit more in a second. But we don't love this passage if we're Christians. Like it says, don't judge, period. Or if you're going to judge, know this, that the measure you use, it will be used to you. Now, for many of us, that should probably give us pause. It should cause many of us not to be hypocritical. It should cause many of us to be careful what we say. In fact, it talks about this. When you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye, and don't worry about the plank in your own eye. In other words, you had a little piece of sawdust in your eye, they had a 2x4 sticking out of your own. You're worried about their piece of sawdust when there's 2x4 out of your own. What Jesus is trying to get across here is so often we're so worried about someone else and not really our own spiritual life. In other words, we are pretty good at seeing the great fault in someone else, and we're not so great at being self-reflective enough to see our own need for God's grace, our own need for our life to be transformed. And so we'll point out the sin in someone else's life rather than looking at, it's easy to talk about someone else's sexual sin or someone else's addiction. And it's a lot harder to talk about the reality that, I may have a pride issue. I may lack humility. I may not be generous. I may be selfish. These things are pride as well. And yet we're quick to point out someone else's and slow to recognize our own. I've been guilty of it. Have you? And so what do we do with that? But he says, well, why don't you begin to look at yourself? And then he adds this line that I think is really important for us. He says, because then I'll hear someone say, well, iron sharpens iron, and we should help each other. Yes, we should, if we are in relationship to one another. But what he says here in this, do not give to dogs what is sacred, do not throw your pearls to pigs. Why does he say this stuff? He says this because we have to look at the spiritual maturity of the other person to have that conversation. So if we're trying to have a conversation with someone who doesn't claim to be a follower of Jesus, and we're trying to tell them they're living this sinful life, that's exactly what Jesus is saying don't do. It's a waste of your time. Now, if they profess to be a follower of Jesus, and they're living into areas that are definitely sinful, speak into that with love and grace, while also recognizing the 2x4 in your own eye before you point out their speck. And when we do that, that's called love, not judgment. So the difference here matters so much. The heart at which we say something matters so much. So then what do we do if we're not called to judge? What do we do about that? How do we change? The next section is kind of our answer to that. Here's what Jesus says. Ask, and it will be given to you. Seek, and you will find. Knock, and the door will be opened to you. For everyone who asks receives. He who seeks finds. And to him who knocks, the door will be opened. Which of you, if his son asks for bread, will give him a stone? Or if he asks for a fish, will give him a snake? If you then, though you are evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father in heaven give good gifts to those who ask him? So in everything, do to others what you would have them do to you, for this sums up the law and the prophets. So what do? We seek Jesus. We seek the Father. And we do to others what we wish was done to us. So back to the passage above that, if we were going to reach out to someone else in love, we'd better do it in a way we would want someone to speak to us if we were in the same situation. We'd better do it with the same graciousness that we would want extended to us. If we're going to chew them out or just talk harshly, would we want that to us? And if the answer is yes, I don't know who you are because I've never met that person. It's one thing to be challenged and be invited to a better way of life. It's another thing to be ridiculed or put down. And so let's make sure as followers of Jesus, it's evident to others that we love him and we know he has loved us. And we recognize that we have fallen way short, but it's the grace of God that extends to us, that transforms us. And then we would take seriously this last line that I read today So in everything, do to others what you would have them do to you, for this sums up the law and the prophets. Ask, seek, knock. May God's grace be evident in your life today, and may you and I live in such a way that God's grace is evident to those who we come in contact with. We'll catch you next time for another First 5.